My name is Brielle. I'm 33, and the one rule I gave my sister before my daughter's transplant surgery was simple. Never bring her ex-boyfriend near our house. She broke it within a week. That single betrayal, discovered in the middle of the most fragile, critical recovery period of my daughter's life, threatened to unravel everything I had worked so desperately hard to protect and control. It had taken almost 2 years to reach this point of relief and cautious hope. My daughter, Ren, only 11 years old, had been living with kidney failure since her diagnosis, enduring dialysis 3 times weekly, watching other children her age attend school and birthday parties while she sat connected to machines, exhausted, pale, and increasingly withdrawn from the normal childhood she deserved. When the transplant coordinator finally called to say a donor match had been found, I dropped my phone right there in the kitchen, sobbing uncontrollably with relief and terror intertwined. Ren had been waiting so long, hoping so desperately, and now everything was finally actually happening. I called my sister Camille immediately, unable to hold the overwhelming news inside myself alone. The surgery went remarkably well, better than even the surgical team had initially anticipated. But the doctors were clear that recovery would require weeks of meticulous care. Ren's immune system would remain dangerously suppressed during this period, making her extremely vulnerable to infection, stress, and any unnecessary complications that could threaten the success of the transplant itself. I knew immediately I would need help managing everything simultaneously: my job, our household, and Ren's demanding post-surgical care schedule. Camille offered without hesitation, insisting on moving in temporarily to support us through those critical first weeks. I felt genuine gratitude flooding through me, especially given how close she and Ren had always been throughout my daughter's entire childhood. Before Camille officially moved into our guest room, I sat her down seriously at our kitchen table, determined to communicate every instruction the medical team had given us with complete clarity. Strict hand-washing protocols, no unnecessary visitors whatsoever, careful monitoring of Ren's temperature and energy levels throughout each day, documented precisely for our follow-up appointments. Above everything else, one particular boundary mattered more to me than any other rule the doctors had outlined. "Your ex-boyfriend Derek doesn't come near this house," I said firmly, studying Camille's face carefully for any hint of resistance or hesitation regarding something I considered completely non-negotiable, given our family's history with him. Camille and Derek had dated for nearly 2 years, before finally separating 8 months earlier, a relationship defined by unpredictability, manipulation, and repeated emotional chaos that had rippled outward, affecting our entire extended family circle far beyond just the 2 of them directly involved in that particular turbulent romantic relationship. "I know," Camille said quickly, nodding along as though my request were something obvious, barely worth stating explicitly given the circumstances. "Of course, Brielle. I wouldn't do that, especially not now, not with Ren recovering from something this serious." Her reassurance sounded genuine, and I believed her completely, relieved finally to have reliable support. The first few days following Ren's discharge from the hospital settled into a careful, exhausting rhythm between us. Medication schedules required constant attention. Temperature checks happened every few hours. Gentle physical therapy exercises needed patient supervision. Camille handled meals and household tasks efficiently, freeing me to focus entirely on monitoring my daughter's fragile recovery. I noticed small inconsistencies during that first week, though nothing alarming enough to immediately worry me given everything else demanding my attention. Camille seemed occasionally distracted, checking her phone more frequently than usual, stepping outside periodically for calls she never fully explained afterward when she returned back inside our quiet, carefully managed household. I attributed her behavior to ordinary stress, the pressure of helping manage a medically fragile household while simultaneously processing her own recent difficult breakup. Looking back now, I recognize how easily I dismissed warning signs simply because I was too exhausted and consumed with Ren's recovery to consider anything beyond our immediate medical priorities during those demanding days. On the 6th day since bringing Ren home, I had an early morning follow-up appointment scheduled for routine blood work, checking her kidney function and immune markers carefully. Normally, I handled these appointments alone, while Camille managed things at home. That particular morning, traffic proved lighter than expected, allowing me to finish considerably earlier than I had originally planned. I remember pulling into our driveway nearly 40 minutes ahead of schedule, feeling relieved to have extra time before Ren's midday medication was due. As I approached our house, I noticed an unfamiliar black sedan parked along the curb nearby, one I didn't immediately recognize from anywhere in our quiet residential neighborhood, where I knew most vehicles by sight. My stomach tightened instinctively at the sight of that unfamiliar car, though I quickly told myself it was probably nothing significant. Perhaps a neighbor's visitor or simply a delivery driver taking an extended break somewhere along our street. I parked in my usual spot in the driveway, gathering my purse and keys before walking calmly toward our front door. As I approached the entrance, key already retrieved from my purse, I heard voices drifting from inside the house, one clearly belonging to Camille, immediately familiar and recognizable even through the closed door. The second voice, lower and distinctly male, sent an unmistakable jolt of recognition through my entire body before I fully processed what exactly I was hearing. I froze momentarily on our front porch, heart suddenly pounding as recognition solidified completely. That voice belonged to Derek. I stood there for several seconds, disbelief washing over me, desperately hoping I was somehow mistaken. That exhaustion and stress were simply playing tricks on my overwhelmed, sleep-deprived mind that particular morning. I pushed the door open slowly, bracing myself for whatever I might discover inside, though nothing could have fully prepared me for the sight waiting in my own living room. There he was, Derek, sitting comfortably on my couch as though he belonged there completely, as though my explicit rule meant absolutely nothing to either of them. Camille sat beside him, visibly startled the moment she noticed me standing frozen in the doorway, her face draining of color almost instantly. "Brielle," she said quickly, scrambling to stand up from the couch. "I can explain. This isn't what it looks like." Her words felt hollow immediately, given exactly what it clearly, undeniably looked like. "You need to leave," I said to Derek directly, my voice shaking with barely controlled fury, gesturing sharply toward our front door. He raised his hands defensively, standing slowly, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden tension filling the room. "I was just visiting," he said carefully, though his explanation offered no genuine comfort whatsoever. "Now," I repeated firmly, refusing to let my voice waver despite the anger and fear coursing through me simultaneously. Derek glanced briefly at Camille, before finally moving toward the door, grabbing his jacket from where it hung carelessly over our armchair, clearly having settled in for more than just a brief, casual visit. Once Derek had finally left, closing the door quietly behind him, I turned toward Camille, disbelief and fury tangling together violently inside my chest. "One rule," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "I asked you for one single thing, Camille, while Ren is recovering from major surgery in the next room." "He just wanted to check in," Camille said defensively, though her explanation sounded weak even as she spoke it aloud, clearly recognizing how insufficient it truly was given everything at stake. "Nothing happened, Brielle. We were just talking." Her attempt at reassurance did nothing to ease the fear and betrayal building rapidly inside me. I thought immediately of Ren, resting upstairs, immune system dangerously suppressed, completely vulnerable to any germs or stress that Derek's unexpected, unauthorized presence might have introduced into our carefully controlled household environment. "Do you understand what could happen if she gets sick right now?" I asked, my voice cracking with genuine terror. Camille's expression finally shifted, something like genuine guilt flickering across her face as the weight of the situation seemed to fully register within her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, though the apology felt insufficient given what she had risked, given the explicit boundary she had promised so confidently just one single week earlier at our kitchen table. I walked past her without responding further, heading straight upstairs to check on Ren, needing to confirm my daughter remained safe and undisturbed by whatever exposure risk Derek's presence might have introduced. Camille's soft footsteps followed behind me hesitantly, though I couldn't yet find words to properly address the depth of betrayal I was feeling in that devastating moment. I came home early from the hospital to find his car in my driveway. My daughter, Ren, still recovering, told me he'd just stopped by. My sister Camille shrugged it off like it meant nothing at all. That casual dismissal, more than anything else, told me this conversation was far from finished between us. I found Ren sitting up in bed, pale but alert, a coloring book open across her lap, seemingly unaware of the tension building downstairs just moments earlier. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, forcing calm into my voice despite my racing heart. "How are you feeling? Any fever, any pain since this morning?" "I'm okay, Mom," she said, offering a small, tired smile. "Aunt Camille's friend came by earlier. He seemed nice." My stomach dropped hearing her confirm it so innocently, completely unaware of who Derek actually was, or why his presence represented such a serious violation of everything I had carefully arranged to protect her. "Did he touch you, sweetheart? Get close to you at all?" I asked, trying desperately to keep my voice steady, not wanting to frighten her further. Ren shook her head slowly. "No, he just said hi from the doorway. Aunt Camille told him to stay in the living room because I needed rest." Small relief flickered through me. I checked her temperature carefully, relieved to find it normal. Checked her surgical site for any unusual redness or swelling. Relieved again to find everything appeared stable despite the unauthorized visitor who had been in our home that morning. Still, the anxiety of not knowing what germs he might have carried refused to fully release its grip on me. I kissed Ren's forehead gently, promising to check on her again soon, before heading back downstairs where Camille waited nervously in the kitchen, arms crossed, clearly bracing herself for the conversation she knew was inevitable. "She's fine," I said flatly, unable to keep the edge from my voice despite my relief. "See? I told you nothing happened," Camille said, her tone carrying a defensiveness that immediately reignited my anger. "Derek just stopped by for a few minutes. He didn't even go near Ren's room." Her casual explanation, delivered as though this somehow minimized the severity of what she had done, made my hands clench tightly. "That's not the point, Camille," I said, my voice rising despite my attempt to remain calm. "I told you explicitly, no visitors, especially not him. You promised me. You sat right there at that table and promised me you understood how serious this was." My sister's expression hardened slightly, defensiveness replacing the earlier guilt. "I know what I promised," she said, "but you're acting like I brought a stranger with the flu into the house. It was Derek. He's harmless. You're overreacting, Brielle." Her words stunned me momentarily, disbelief at how quickly she had shifted from apologetic to dismissive within the span of just minutes. "Overreacting?" I repeated, my voice sharpening further. "My daughter's immune system is completely suppressed right now. Any exposure to unnecessary germs, any additional stress in this house, could seriously jeopardize her recovery. This isn't about Derek being harmless. This is about you breaking an explicit boundary I set for her safety." Camille fell silent for a moment, though her expression remained guarded rather than genuinely remorseful. "Fine," she finally said. "It won't happen again." Her tone lacked the sincerity I desperately needed to hear, sounding more like an attempt to end the argument than genuine acknowledgement of how seriously she had violated my trust. I wanted to believe her, wanted desperately to move past this and focus entirely on Ren's continued recovery, without additional conflict complicating an already exhausting situation. But something about Camille's quick dismissal, her unwillingness to fully sit with the gravity of what she'd done, left an uneasy feeling lingering uncomfortably in my chest. Over the following days, I found myself watching Camille more carefully than before, noticing small behaviors I might have otherwise dismissed. She continued stepping outside frequently for phone calls, always closing the door behind her, always returning with an expression carefully arranged into practiced neutrality, that somehow felt increasingly unconvincing. I told myself I was being paranoid, that stress and exhaustion were making me suspicious of perfectly ordinary behavior. Camille had apologized, had promised it wouldn't happen again, and I desperately wanted to trust that promise completely. Still, the uneasy feeling refused to fully dissipate, lingering quietly beneath my daily routine. 3 days after the incident with Derek, I noticed Camille had left her phone unattended on the kitchen counter while helping Ren with an afternoon snack upstairs. I told myself firmly that checking it would be a violation of her privacy, that trust required giving her space rather than monitoring her every move suspiciously. Yet the uneasy feeling persisted, growing steadily stronger despite my attempts to rationalize it away entirely. That evening, while preparing dinner, I mentioned casually to Camille that I'd need to use the family tablet for Ren's medical portal, checking updated lab results the hospital had promised to upload sometime that day. Camille nodded absently, distracted by something on her own phone, seemingly unconcerned about my request. I retrieved the tablet from the living room charging station, opening the browser to access Ren's patient portal, needing to verify her latest blood work results before her medication dosage adjustment scheduled for the following morning. As the tablet loaded, a notification banner appeared briefly across the top of the screen. A message preview from a messaging app I didn't immediately recognize as one I used myself. The tablet, shared among our household devices, occasionally synced notifications from Camille's accounts whenever she used it for browsing during her stay with us. I almost dismissed it entirely, focused primarily on locating Ren's lab results before the notification disappeared automatically from the screen. But something about the sender's name, paired with a brief preview of the message content, caught my attention sharply enough that I paused, reading the fragment more carefully. The preview showed Derek's name clearly, followed by a message fragment that made my chest tighten immediately. "Can't wait until we can actually be together properly," it read, "once everything with the custody case settles down." I stared at the screen, confusion and dawning suspicion tangling together rapidly inside me. Custody case, together properly. Those words didn't align at all with Camille's earlier claim that Derek had simply stopped by casually, that their interaction had been brief and inconsequential. This message suggested something far more ongoing, far more serious than the isolated incident I had confronted her about days earlier. My hands trembled slightly as I set the tablet down carefully, mind racing through the implications of what I had just glimpsed accidentally. Had Camille been lying to me the entire time, minimizing something far more significant happening secretly beneath the surface of our household while I remained completely focused on Ren's medical recovery? I thought about confronting her immediately, demanding answers about what exactly that message meant, what custody case she was referring to, what together properly actually implied about the true nature of their supposedly ended relationship. But something held me back, a need to understand the full picture before reacting impulsively. Instead, I decided I needed to look more carefully, to understand exactly what I was dealing with before confronting Camille again. Whatever she had been hiding, it clearly extended far beyond one careless afternoon visit, and I needed real answers before I could properly address whatever deeper betrayal might be unfolding within my own household. Then I found messages on Camille's phone, arranged accidentally on the shared family tablet. She'd been secretly meeting him for months, planning to move in together once his custody case settled. That discovery reframed everything I thought I understood about my sister's recent behavior throughout her entire stay with us. That night, after Ren had fallen asleep and Camille had retreated to the guest room claiming exhaustion, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the family tablet still resting on the counter where I'd left it earlier. The single message fragment I'd glimpsed kept replaying through my mind, refusing to let me settle into anything resembling calm. I knew accessing Camille's private messages further would cross a boundary I generally respected. But the safety of my household, the honesty of someone I'd trusted enough to invite into our home during Ren's most vulnerable recovery period, felt like it outweighed my usual hesitation about respecting her privacy completely. I picked up the tablet again, navigating carefully to the messaging app where the notification had originated. Because Camille had previously logged into this account during her stay, using our shared household device for convenience, the conversation history remained accessible, still logged in from whenever she'd last used it, browsing casually. My hands shook slightly as I opened the full conversation thread with Derek, scrolling backward through weeks of messages I hadn't known existed, hadn't even suspected given how confidently Camille had claimed their relationship had ended completely 8 months earlier, well before she'd moved in to help us. The messages painted a picture entirely different from what she had led me to believe. Loving, intimate exchanges dated back nearly 3 months, well before Ren's surgery had even been scheduled. They had never actually stopped seeing each other, had simply hidden their ongoing relationship from our entire extended family circle. I read message after message, disbelief growing heavier with each new revelation. Derek mentioned his custody case repeatedly throughout the conversation, something about finalizing arrangements for his young son from a previous relationship, promising Camille that once everything settled legally, they could finally move forward together publicly and openly. One message, dated just 2 weeks before Camille moved into our house, stopped me completely. Camille had written, "I'm going to stay with Brielle to help with Ren. It'll be a good cover, honestly. No one will suspect anything if I'm supposedly focused entirely on helping my sister through something this serious." I stared at those words, nausea building steadily in my stomach as the full implications settled over me. Camille hadn't simply broken one rule accidentally, hadn't simply made an impulsive, poorly considered decision when Derek stopped by unexpectedly. She had deliberately used my daughter's medical crisis as convenient cover for continuing her secret relationship. I continued scrolling, finding additional messages confirming multiple secret meetings throughout her stay, arranged during times when I was occupied with hospital appointments or exhausted enough to sleep deeply through the night. Camille had been systematically deceiving me while I trusted her completely with my daughter's fragile safety and recovery. Anger and heartbreak tangled together violently inside my chest as I continued reading, uncovering the full scope of her deception. She had known exactly how serious the boundary was, had understood completely the medical risks involved, yet had prioritized her secret relationship over the explicit safety requirements I had established for my daughter's protection. I thought about confronting her immediately, marching upstairs and demanding she explain herself right then, regardless of the late hour or Ren's need for a quiet, undisturbed household. But exhaustion and the magnitude of what I'd discovered held me frozen at the kitchen table, unable to fully process everything all at once. Instead, I sat there for nearly an hour, reading through additional messages, piecing together the complete timeline of her deception. Derek's custody case, I learned, involved allegations of instability that had concerned the family court, allegations that included his previous erratic behavior during his relationship with Camille. The messages revealed Camille reassuring him repeatedly that she would support whatever narrative he needed for court, downplaying his past behavior toward her during their turbulent relationship in exchange for his promise that they would eventually build a life together once his custody situation resolved favorably. I felt sick reading that particular exchange, understanding now that Camille had potentially been willing to misrepresent Derek's history, behavior that had concerned our entire family previously, simply to protect their secret relationship and support whatever legal strategy he needed to regain custody of his son. I set the tablet down finally, unable to continue reading further that night, my mind racing through implications I hadn't even fully considered yet. What did this mean for Ren's safety moving forward? What did this reveal about Camille's judgment, her priorities, her willingness to deceive people who trusted her completely? I thought about our parents, about how they had always described Camille as somewhat impulsive but fundamentally good-hearted, someone who occasionally made questionable decisions but never intentionally hurtful ones. This discovery challenged that characterization entirely, revealing calculation and deliberate deception I hadn't previously believed her capable of. I barely slept that night, mind cycling repeatedly through everything I had discovered, trying to determine how to approach the conversation I knew needed to happen the following day. Ren's continued recovery remained my absolute priority, meaning I needed to handle this situation carefully, without creating additional stress within our household. Morning arrived heavy with dread and simmering anger I had spent the entire night trying unsuccessfully to fully process. I checked on Ren first, relieved to find her stable and comfortable, before finally steeling myself to confront Camille about everything I had discovered hidden within those secret messages overnight. I found Camille in the kitchen, making coffee, seemingly unaware that anything had changed since our tense conversation just days earlier about Derek's unauthorized visit. She glanced up when I entered, offering a tentative smile that immediately faltered when she registered my expression, hard and unwavering. "We need to talk," I said flatly, gesturing toward the kitchen table where I had spent hours the previous night uncovering the full extent of her deception. Camille's expression shifted immediately, guilt and something closer to fear flickering across her features as she seemed to sense exactly what conversation was coming. I confronted her, furious. "You knew what he did to this family. Why would you risk everything?" She snapped back coldly. "He's still breathing, isn't he? That's more than you can say for some people." Her words hung in the air between us, cryptic and cutting, revealing something far deeper than I had anticipated. Camille sat down slowly across from me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug, knuckles whitening as she waited for me to speak first. I placed the tablet between us, the messaging app still open to the conversation I had discovered overnight. "I read everything," I said quietly, watching her face carefully. Her expression crumbled almost immediately, any remaining pretense of innocence dissolving as she stared down at the screen showing her own words reflected back at her. "You went through my phone?" she asked, though her tone carried more resignation than genuine outrage, as though she'd anticipated this discovery eventually happening. "It synced to the family tablet," I said flatly, unwilling to let her redirect blame toward my method of discovery rather than addressing the actual content of what I had found. "Camille, you've been lying to me for months. You used Ren's surgery as cover to keep seeing Derek behind everyone's back." She remained silent for a long moment, staring at her coffee rather than meeting my eyes directly. "It's not that simple," she finally said, her voice quieter now. "Derek and I never actually stopped loving each other. Everyone judged him so harshly after what happened, but they didn't understand the full situation." "The full situation?" I repeated, disbelief sharpening my voice further. "Camille, he grabbed you during an argument hard enough to leave bruises. He threatened Dad when he tried to intervene. You knew what he did to this family, to you specifically. Why would you risk everything, risk Ren's safety, to keep seeing him secretly?" Camille's eyes flashed with sudden defensiveness, the guilt from moments earlier hardening into something sharper. "You don't know the whole story," she said. "He's changed, Brielle. He's been in therapy, working on his anger. People deserve second chances, don't they? Or is that only something you believe in for yourself?" Her question struck me as strange, oddly pointed, carrying an edge I didn't immediately understand. "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused by the sudden shift in her tone. The accusatory undercurrent that seemed to have little to do with the actual situation we were currently discussing directly. "Nothing," Camille said quickly, though her expression suggested otherwise, something bitter and long-held simmering just beneath the surface of her carefully controlled composure. "Forget it. The point is, Derek isn't the monster everyone makes him out to be. He's still breathing, isn't he? That's more than you can say for some people." The words landed strangely, cryptically, and I stared at her, trying to understand exactly what she meant by such an odd, pointed statement. "What does that mean?" I asked slowly, sensing there was something deeper happening beneath this conversation than simply Camille defending her secret relationship with Derek. Camille's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might refuse to elaborate entirely. But something in her expression shifted. Years of apparently buried resentment finally breaking through the surface after being suppressed for far too long within our complicated sisterly relationship dynamic throughout our entire lives. "You've always gotten everything, Brielle," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion she'd clearly been suppressing. The perfect marriage, the perfect daughter, the perfect life everyone admires. Meanwhile, I've spent years being compared to you, feeling like whatever I choose is never good enough for this family. Her words stunned me. The sudden shift from discussing Derek to airing what sounded like years of accumulated jealousy and resentment I had genuinely never fully recognized existed between us. Camille, that's not fair, I said carefully, though I could sense the depth of hurt driving her sudden, unexpected confession. Isn't it? She asked, tears welling in her eyes now. Everyone rallied around Ren's surgery, around your perfect little family drama. Meanwhile, when I tried dating Derek, everyone judged me constantly, treated me like I was making some catastrophic mistake, like my choices didn't matter as much as yours always seemed to. I sat there, absorbing the unexpected complexity suddenly revealed within this confrontation. Understanding now that her secret relationship with Derek wasn't simply about him specifically, but about something much deeper, a long simmering resentment about feeling perpetually overshadowed and judged within our family dynamic. That still doesn't excuse deceiving me, I said firmly, though my voice softened slightly, recognizing the genuine pain underlying her defensive words. Especially not while Ren's health was at serious risk. Whatever resentment you've been carrying, Camille, you should have talked to me directly instead of secretly deceiving everyone. Camille wiped at her eyes, nodding slowly, some of her earlier defensiveness finally beginning to crack under the weight of genuine emotion. I know, she admitted quietly. I just felt like nobody would understand. Like everyone would immediately side against me the way they always seem to when it comes to my choices. That's not true, I said, though I understood why she might genuinely believe it, given our family's clear history of concern regarding her relationship with Derek specifically. But Camille, this isn't just about your choices anymore. This is about the safety and well-being of a child recovering from major surgery. She nodded again, tears falling freely now, some combination of shame and lingering defensiveness still visible in her expression. What happens now? She asked quietly, echoing almost exactly the same question she had asked days earlier following Derek's unauthorized visit, though the stakes felt entirely different now. I sat back in my chair, exhausted from the emotional weight of everything unfolding between us, needing time to fully process not just her deception, but the deeper family resentment she had just revealed so unexpectedly. I need you to move out, I said finally, my voice steady despite everything churning inside me. Her words revealed old jealousy I never understood until then. I set firm boundaries, limiting contact until she proved real change. Months later, she finally apologized, and we're slowly rebuilding trust. That resolution, though far from instant, began the moment Camille packed her bags that same difficult afternoon in our kitchen. Camille left quietly that day, arranging temporary housing with a college friend nearby, while I focused entirely on stabilizing Ren's environment once again after everything that had unfolded. I watched her car pull away from the curb, a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak settling heavily in my chest as the front door finally closed behind her. I called my parents that evening, explaining as gently as possible what had happened, watching through the phone as their shock and disappointment mirrored the emotions I had already processed myself since discovering everything the previous night. My father grew quiet. My mother asked careful, measured questions about Ren's safety. My mother offered to come help instead, and I gratefully accepted, needing reliable, trustworthy support during Ren's continued recovery. Without the underlying tension and uncertainty Camille's presence had introduced into our household throughout those chaotic final days before everything came crashing into the open. The following weeks passed more smoothly once my mother arrived, our household settling into a structured rhythm built around medication schedules and gradual improvements in Ren's strength and energy levels. I felt myself slowly exhaling, releasing tension I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying constantly throughout Camille's stay. I didn't hear from Camille directly during those first few weeks, communication passing instead through our mother, who relayed brief, careful updates about how Camille was doing, how she was reportedly reflecting seriously on everything that had happened. I appreciated the space, needing genuine time to process her betrayal fully. Ren, thankfully, recovered beautifully over the following months, her strength returning steadily, color returning to her cheeks, energy returning to her laughter, as she gradually resumed normal childhood activities like riding her bike and playing with neighborhood friends again. I watched her progress with quiet, constant gratitude. I thought often, during quiet evenings after Ren had gone to sleep, about Camille's confession that difficult morning, her raw admission of feeling perpetually overshadowed within our family dynamic. As my own anger gradually settled into something more reflective, I began genuinely examining whether her perception held real truth. I called our mother one evening specifically to ask whether she believed Camille had legitimate reasons to feel overlooked or unfairly judged compared to me throughout our childhood and into adulthood. My mother hesitated for a long moment before finally admitting something I hadn't expected to hear so honestly from her. "Maybe we did make things harder for her sometimes," my mother said slowly, without fully realizing it. "You always seem to handle things so effortlessly, and I think we compared you two more than we should have, especially when Camille struggled with certain decisions throughout her 20s and early 30s. That conversation shifted something within my own understanding, allowing me to hold both truths simultaneously without contradiction: genuine anger toward Camille's deception and dangerous choices, alongside growing empathy for whatever deeper insecurities had quietly shaped her decision-making throughout this entire painful situation. 2 months after Camille moved out, she reached out to me directly for the first time since that tense final conversation. A simple text message asking if we could talk whenever I felt ready. I stared at the message for a long time, uncertain whether I felt prepared for that particular conversation just yet. I eventually agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory away from our family home, wanting the conversation to happen somewhere that didn't carry the heavy emotional weight of everything that had unfolded there previously between us. Camille arrived first, already seated when I walked through the door. She looked different somehow, noticeably thinner, dark circles visible beneath her eyes suggesting genuine struggle over the previous months. "I've been in therapy," she said quietly. Once we'd settled into our seats with coffee neither of us really touched, both too nervous to focus on anything beyond the conversation ahead. "Working through a lot of things," she continued. "Not just about Derek, but about how I've felt within our family for years now. Feelings I never really let myself examine honestly, until everything fell apart so completely." Her admission felt different this time, less defensive, more genuinely reflective than before. "I ended things with Derek completely," she said, watching my reaction carefully across the small table between us. "My therapist helped me see clearly how unhealthy that relationship really was, how I was partly using it to rebel against feeling constantly compared to you throughout our entire lives together." I listened carefully, appreciating her willingness to examine her own patterns honestly, rather than simply deflecting blame entirely onto external circumstances or unfair family dynamics alone. "I'm proud of you for doing that work," I said honestly, surprising myself with how genuinely I meant those words. "I know I hurt you badly," Camille said, tears welling in her eyes again as her voice trembled slightly. "Not just breaking your rule, but deceiving you completely while Ren was so vulnerable and recovering. I think about that constantly, how selfish my choices truly were during such a critical time." "You did hurt me," I confirmed honestly, unwilling to minimize the genuine damage her actions had caused despite appreciating her current, seemingly sincere reflection. "Rebuilding trust is going to take real time, Camille. Consistent actions, not just apologies delivered over coffee on one single afternoon." She nodded firmly, understanding evident in her expression without any defensive pushback this time, a marked change from our earlier confrontation months earlier. "I understand completely," she said. "Whatever boundaries you need, whatever pace feels right to you, I'll respect it fully, however long it takes." We agreed that afternoon to slowly rebuild our relationship, starting with limited, supervised contact, gradually expanding as trust developed naturally through consistent, reliable behavior demonstrated over time, rather than promised hastily in a single emotional conversation. I made my expectations clear and specific. Camille accepted these boundaries without argument, understanding clearly that she needed to earn back trust through sustained, patient effort, rather than expecting immediate forgiveness simply because she had apologized sincerely once. Over the following months, she consistently showed up for scheduled family dinners, respectfully. She continued therapy diligently, occasionally sharing small insights she'd gained about her own patterns and insecurities during our gradually increasing conversations together over coffee or during family gatherings. I watched her genuinely working toward becoming more emotionally honest and self-aware with each passing month. 6 months after that initial devastating confrontation, I finally felt comfortable allowing Camille's supervised time alone with Ren again. Watching carefully at first from another room, gradually relaxing as I witnessed consistent, trustworthy behavior develop naturally between them during those careful visits. Ren, thankfully, remained largely unaware of the full complexity behind her aunt's temporary absence, simply happy that Camille was visiting regularly again, bringing small gifts and patiently listening to stories about school and friends the way she always had before everything had briefly fallen apart between us. Looking back now, nearly a year later, I recognize that Camille's betrayal, painful and frightening as it truly was, ultimately opened necessary conversations within our family about patterns we'd unconsciously perpetuated for years, without ever fully acknowledging their quiet, damaging impact on her sense of self-worth. Camille still attends therapy regularly, continuing to work diligently through the insecurities that had contributed toward her earlier choices and secretive behavior. Our relationship isn't perfect, and probably never will be entirely free of complicated history, but it feels genuinely rebuilt now, founded on honesty instead of secrecy.